Members, I'll call the Minnesota House Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice Reform, Finance and Policy Division to order. Before we start, just want to share with public that this meeting is being held in accordance with the House Rule 10.01, which you can view on our House website, and basically it allows us as an institution to hold hearings remotely so that we can then take official action in debating and moving legislation. Members of the public who have any questions about that process can contact our committee administrator, Jamel, and I'll give that email in a second. Anyone in the public wishing to testify on the issues, legislation before this committee can also contact Mr. Lundy, and you can contact him at jamel.lundy@house.mn. Jamel is JAMAEL.Lundy, LUNDY, jamel.lundy@house.mn. Also, this hearing can be viewed live, streaming from the Minnesota House website, as well as on Facebook Live and on YouTube. And the links for those are on the committee page of the Minnesota House website. So with that, members, we're going to get started, and we'll begin by doing a quorum call, and I'll have the clerk take the roll.
Mariani.
Present.
Edelson.
Make sure you're muted until it's time for you to speak, members. I hear someone's phone in the background going off.
Johnson.
Present.
Christensen.
Present.
Considine. Considine. Dean.
Present.
Howard.
Present.
Lesch.
Present.
Long.
Present.
Lucero.
Yes, sir.
Miller.
Present.
Moeller.
Present.
Nash.
Present.
Novotny.
Present.
O'Neill.
Present.
Pinto.
Present.
Poston.
Present.
Edelson. Edelson. Considine. Considine. Okay, we have quorum. And then I will keep you all posted when Representative Edelson, Representative Considine get on.
Very well. Thank you, Jason. The first order of business is adoption of our minutes. I wonder if our vice chair would move adoption of the April 16 minutes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, April 23rd.
Oh, well then that would be the inappropriate motion. So would Representative Edelson be so kind as to move the April 23rd minutes of the committee? Or anyone could do that.
So moved.
Very well. Representative Christensen moves adoption of the April 23rd minutes. Members will do this by a voice vote. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion prevails, and the minutes of April 23rd are adopted. Okay, and I did see something pop up here that Representative Edelson is still trying to get into the meeting or got bumped out somehow. But we'll take care of that in a second. Members, we have 3 items before us today. 3 bills that I hope that we'll be able to act on. The first one is House File 3156, which will serve as a vehicle bill for our emergency COVID response language, and I'll get to that in a second. Then we're going to hear House File 1236, which is Chairman Lesch's bill. The bill itself is on unmanned aerial vehicle use regulated by law enforcement agencies, otherwise known as the drone bill. However, our intent is to have House File 1236 be used as a vehicle for House File 471, which is legislation related to properties that are subject to forfeiture. And we'll explain when we get to there, why we're doing that particular procedure. And then the third bill is House File 3085, Representative Tabke, which we've heard and laid on the table, and we'll be lifting it off the table for action today. So with that, members, let me make sure I have my motions correct here. Yes. The chair is going to move, or the chair moves House File 3156 be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. So House File 3156 is before us, and members, I am going to move a delete all authors amendment, and so my motion is to move the DE1 amendment. And members, what that will do then is take this bill as a vehicle for the language that we reviewed on April 6th, a few weeks ago, as we were preparing responses to COVID via corrections and public safety, with corrections and public safety considerations. We had a 3-hour hearing. Some of you will recall it was actually the Minnesota Legislature's first ever remote video conference hearing. So we made history that day. However, we basically held an information session and went through language very similar to what's in the DE1 amendment here today. So we spent 3 hours vetting and debating these various provisions. We had testimony from quite a diverse range of groups. From law enforcement, we heard from the sheriffs and the Chiefs Association. We heard from the ombudsperson for corrections, an independent office around which the proposal was largely shaped based on the ombudsperson's office's recommendations for how to align corrections activities to promote public health in response to COVID. We heard from survivor advocates. We also heard from I think it was our state council, African American Heritage, as well as one or two other community-based advocacy groups. It seemed to me we heard from a few others, so it was quite a long hearing. And we also heard from the Commissioner of Corrections, who actually extended his stay with us that day. Had been scheduled to be somewhere else and stuck around to answer questions from committee members. All that by way of saying, members, that the chair's intent is to act on the provision that we've debated pretty extensively on April 6th. There are a series of amendments that will further shape that bill and that members are offering in an attempt to further shape the bill as well. So at this point, it's my intention to have House File 3156 in the form that the author wishes for us to debate and then vote on at the end of our debate. And so with that, members, and I'll take this just as a roll call, or rather a voice vote, because it's a very procedural motion. The motion is to amend House File 3156 with the DE1 amendment. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
No.
Motion prevails. Members, House File 3156, as amended, is before you. And members, I'll do this really quickly, I hope, again, because we spent quite a bit of time on most of these provisions, or pretty much all of them. let me make sure I've got my, okay, very well. So the D1 amendment begins with public access to corrections facility population data for both the Department of Corrections and for local corrections facilities. We heard from Sheriff Leslie, Chief of the Sheriff's Association, or head of this, not quite sure what his title is, director, perhaps, of the Sheriff's Association representative, who was fine with the provision, supported it. The intent behind the provision is to make sure that we've got good public data that spans over time. So we're talking a minimum of 12 months that can help policymakers and the public be able to, among other things, be able to connect the dots relative to facilities, population, and public health efforts to keep the public safe, understanding how we're managing populations in confined areas that are rife for possible infectious expansion. The next provision is a new provision relative to the April 6th conversation. However, we did have this language, rather we did have this concept before us in the Office of Legislative Auditors report back in February. This is a Representative Freiberg provision that lifts out of that OLA recommendation, limiting the occupancy of cells in our corrections institutions. And I will ask staff to describe that provision technically. Section 3, the next section, then is the early release section that we spent the majority of our time discussing on April 6th. This provision, as well as the very first provision about population reporting, comes from the Office of the Ombudsperson for Corrections. The next section is a section that came from our law enforcement community. Both the sheriff and Chief Potts spoke to this issue of testing of public safety specialists. At that time, we were talking specifically about peace officers responding in the field and needing to have as soon as possible the results of tests so that they aren't laid up during mandatory quarantine periods when they could be out doing their work, which is what they prefer to be doing. This provision, we had quite a bit of conversation about, well, who else ought to be covered with this? And so this language then adds a number of other first responders. And again, we can call on our staff, House Research staff, to go through those for us. There's some technical language. No, actually, that's going to come in the form of an amendment. There is a provision here related to the youth intervention program grants. We've talked about that as well, and basically providing for a temporary waiver to matching grants for that Office of Justice program funded effort. So with that, that's the amendment before us. We do have, it isn't my intent to redebate all of these points in depth. However, it's certainly appropriate for committee members to have a conversation about it, as well as for us to take public comment on our bills. And so we do have, I hope we do, I can't see everyone from here, but we do have our independent office of the Ombudspersons for Corrections, again, as I mentioned, whose proposals, ideas shape a number of these provisions. And I just want to make sure that, because I'd rather get him up first to offer a quick comment and then just have him available for any questions that members have. And so if I can get a signal from my staff whether or not we have access to that individual at this point. I'm not hearing confirmation. Oh, we were so technically sound in the last two meetings, and now we're, at least the chair is struggling a little bit. Let me see if I can. Okay, so I'm being told that you'll be able to testify at the end. Let me clarify this with my staff, and in the meantime, let me open this up for member comments or questions.
Mr. Chair, this is Jeff Diebel.
Yeah, please, Mr. Diebel.
I just wanted to point out a procedural issue. I believe I heard you the committee adopt the DE1, and I think there are amendments to that amendment. So I'm not sure we should adopt it before it has an opportunity to be amended.
I see. Okay. All right.
So you may want to reconsider that motion and then take the amendments, and then whatever form it ends up in, you would adopt that version.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Diebel. I appreciate that. I'm going to move to, I move then to reconsider the one amendment. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion prevails. So members, I'm going to move the DE1 amendment. And that then allows us to amend that amendment before we act on it. Thank you, Mr. Diebel. I forgot my procedures here. So, members, with that, I'll just take these in, frankly, in numerical order here. We have the A1 amendment. Representative Pinto, I believe that's your amendment.
And Mr. Chair, I will not be offering that amendment.
Okay. So Representative Pinto will not offer the A1 amendment. Very well. We then have the A2 amendment. Is anyone offering that amendment?
Chair Mariani, that would be mine.
Very well. Representative Johnson moves adoption of the A2 amendment to the DE1 amendment. Representative Johnson.
Yes, I'd like to offer the A2 amendment. The amendment relates to the terminology is more of a technical amendment. The terminology used to refer to COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2. The World Health Organization defines SARS-CoV-2 as the name of the virus. Chair Mariani, you have that term in here, but it's listed as a disease. COVID-19 is the name of the disease. So this amendment would delete the term disease, the word disease, and insert virus.
Very well. I think it's a good amendment. Your staff did a good job of tracking this down and alerted us earlier. Any further discussion on the A2 amendment? If not, since we're amenable to it, why don't we just do a voice vote on this? All in favor of adopting the A2 amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion prevails and the A2 amendment to the DE1 amendment is adopted. And actually, Representative Johnson, I think you're offering the A10 amendment. Is that correct?
I have to find it in my stack of stuff here.
You know what? I can give you some time. That's fine. I did say we were going to do this in numerical order. So then I think Chair Lesch, you're with us. We're not all in the same physical group. Yes, he is. Chair Lesch, I believe the A3 amendment is yours.
It is, Mr. Chair.
Very well. Do you wish to move that?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Very well. Representative Lesch moves adoption of the A3 amendment to the D1 amendment. Chair Lesch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, House File 1031 is the bite-sized version of 1060 and 1061. 1060 would have reduced the fines and fees to a measure to measure it to what it was, before we started increasing all of these fees during the budget shortfalls. But what 1061 does is it ends driver's license suspensions for unpaid traffic tickets and eliminates the tacked on suspension period we add after someone pays a ticket for driving after suspension. So the accountability piece though remains in. That's unpaid tickets would still be sent to collections. The habitual violator law would still result in DL suspensions for anyone with more than, I believe it's 4 tickets in 1 year and 5 tickets in 2 years, which I got close to when I was a 22-year-old with a lead foot, but never actually got suspended for that. But that scofflaw would still remain in place. And there'd be no change to DL suspensions for dangerous driving violations. We've had a lot of talk about ending the suspensions in this committee and in my committee. Originally, this was Representative Zerwas's bill in 2018, and it was included in the Omnibus Prime bill of 2018. It passed bipartisan, bicamerally. Everyone agreed to it, but as we know, Omnibus Prime ran into some executive issues. But these days we got added urgency because of COVID-19. Using a personal vehicle allows for social distancing during essential travel that isn't possible on public transportation or with carpooling. And the financial upheaval of this crisis means many people struggle to maintain employment and they look for new jobs. So there are many essential jobs such as delivery, construction, PCAs that all require driving, not to mention your Instacart people or your Shipt people, which is how you're allowed to shelter in place. The state and municipalities were looking for cost-saving measures due to the financial upheaval of COVID crisis. Reducing driver's license suspensions means a reduced burden on law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges, and corrections officers, and public defenders. There's a potential increase in revenue. Now, after California ended driver's license suspensions for unpaid tickets in 2017, they saw a 9% increase in collections from newly issued tickets. Their judicial council cited fewer driver's license suspensions as a reason for the increased revenue because fewer people lost their jobs and weren't unable to pay their tickets. So if this bill were passed, there'd be 33,000 driver's licenses immediately eligible for reinstatement, 91,000 fewer driver's license suspensions over the year, more individuals able to work and support their families, and increased tax revenue from working Minnesotans, not to mention increased revenue from tickets because of less job loss and reduced burden on law enforcement, courts, and corrections. So there was, Ms. Chair, I think there was some confusion also about a fiscal note confusion on this, and we dealt with this in previous year too. The fiscal note related to a loss to DVS because they were not collecting reinstatement fees anymore. Well, the collection of those reinstatement fees were related to the suspensions and revocations, which we wouldn't have anymore. So there was a little bit of what we think was double counting, which we're working with the governor's office on making sure that, especially in light of the savings that other states have seen, that's accurately reflected in this one as well. And we're in the process of doing that. We feel very solid about it. This was a broad coalition of folks who have come together to support this bill. And we're happy to report that just on Monday, the Minnesota County Attorneys Association placed their imprimatur on it. And it has the support of the Minnesota County Attorneys Association as well, which we're very proud of. So, yes, I would offer the A3 amendment and would stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Very well, thank you, Chair Lesch. Are there any questions for the maker of the motion?
Chair, I raised my hand.
Very well. Representative Odney.
Representative Lesch, I have a couple of questions. You mentioned that if you receive a ticket now, you won't be able to pay the fine because you won't be able to go back to work. I don't know what the current court case load, backload is, but in my experience dealing with these cases, a speeding ticket will be 3 to 4 months before it gets to court if you plead not guilty, which is all a person has to do to put off the ticket, not being paid and being suspended if you don't pay the ticket. Is the governor planning on keeping us locked down for 3 to 4 months?
Well, Mr. Chair
Sure.
and Representative Novotny, I have no idea where we're going to be. And I don't think the governor knows what this disease plans to do either. I appreciate the fact that the governor is using sound science to determine what should be open and what we can do and what we can't do. There's going to be a terminus to that. Absolutely. Everyone's at some point is going to decide, okay, it's time to reopen. But I think reasonable minds can disagree on that. As of right now, I don't know when that's going to be. And I hope it's long enough to keep us all safe, to flatten the curve where we don't overburden our public health resources. But I can't expect to know what the progress of the disease is going to be in Minnesota. I don't think the governor can either. I think he's simply responding to what the numbers and the science shows.
Representative Odney.
Thank you, Representative Lesch. Chair Mariani, Representative Lesch, as I read this, there's no added penalty for driving after suspension. What's the incentive not to drive after suspension then?
Well, Mr. Chair and Representative Novotny, it's still a crime. We're not changing the fact that this is not a crime. The corollary impact of additional license suspensions causes economic hardship and logistics of getting to your job problems for people, which is what we're trying to solve. I was a prosecutor, and you probably don't know this because you knew Representative Novotny. I was a prosecutor for 15 years for the city of St. Paul, and I prosecuted these. We had sometimes 1/3 of my court calendar of 80 some lines driving after suspensions, driving after revocations. It became a real pain in the rear. And trying to solve this over the years included driving diversion programs we tried to solve, and everybody agreed with this. Like this, prosecutors, cops, judges, defense attorneys, everyone agreed that this was the right direction to go just because of how many of these that there were. And it wasn't related to the additional criminal penalty per se. It was mostly related to the impact that it had on these people's driver's licenses, which over the years I maintain was an additional collateral consequence that probably seemed like a good idea at the time when it was passed by the legislature. I think times have changed and most folks agree it's not seen as a good idea anymore.
Thank you, Representative Lesch. One more question, Chair.
Representative Odney, please.
Okay. Representative Lesch, we have increasing penalties. We have increasing crime levels for just about everything. Why wouldn't we do it for this? What is, the one way to avoid a driving after suspension ticket is quit driving after suspension.
Well,
or pay your fines.
Sure.
Mr. Chair and Representative Novotny, you mean enhanced penalties for crimes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Ms. Chair and Representative Novotny, driving after suspension has never been an enhanceable crime per se. Like it doesn't. We enhanced the the penalties as a bench guideline. But if you got, a second one, it was not, a gross misdemeanor. If you got a fourth one, like it is with insurance violations, for example, if you get your third insurance file, driving without insurance, then it's gross misdemeanor. We never did that with driving after revocation. What we did typically, at least every county handled it differently, but I know in Ramsey County, we treat the first one as a petty. The second one would be a misdemeanor, but we'd handle it with no jail time. The third time would be no jail time, but it'd be hanging over your head. On the fourth one, we started giving jail time, and it was 15 days. And sometimes these people would come in with a stack of them because, they'd been out of state or whatever, and there's like 5 or 6 of them. Well, we added 3 days. We added 15 days in jail for your fourth one, and then every one after your fourth, we stacked 3 days on top. And the point of it was exactly what you were saying, was that, well, hang on a second. See, now we're giving cut rate fire sale discounts for people who are scofflaws. And that was the justification behind it. But sooner or later, the jail people would talk to us and say, why are you wasting my time with people who are sitting in the workhouse because they didn't have a license because they couldn't pay? To a lot of the sheriffs around there that I talked to, because I dealt with a lot of the sheriffs because they're in court too, they were throwing up their hands. They're saying, forget about it. Find another way to do it if you have to. And so that's what we chose to do. We implemented a driving diversion program, which is done voluntarily and very effectively. But folks saw that was just kind of a patchwork, and we wanted to put this into place because I think folks agreed that the time has come for us to stop doing this.
Very well. We have Representative O'Neill and Representative Johnson. Representative O'Neill.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Representative Lesch, for the bill. I'm supportive of this, and it makes sense to me, particularly when you talk about anyone that is a dangerous driver. This doesn't apply to them. These are people that have gotten tickets and are not paying them. And instead, we're sending it to collections. You had said something in your testimony that really kind of perked my interest, Representative Lesch, and you had said that, for these folks, if they don't have a driver's license, they'll be using transit. And just about 2 hours ago, the Star Tribune had a big article specifically about Hennepin County and how 2/3 of all the COVID deaths were in Hennepin County. And Commissioner Malcolm pointed out the fact that part of the reason why Hennepin got hit so hard is because of the dense population of Hennepin County, plus the heavy use of transit in Hennepin County. And that actually worked to spread the disease much more quickly in Hennepin. So not only 2/3 of the deaths, but quite a few of the cases in total are in Hennepin. So in a strange way, this could actually get at some of that issue too, because instead of losing a driver's license, it just gets sent to collections and they can continue hopefully working and making enough money to pay for it. So I just wanted to offer my support, and I thank you for doing this. I know you and I've talked about this throughout the years, and I'm glad that it's finally in bill form and in front of us, and I'll be voting yes on your amendment.
Thank you.
Very well. Representative Johnson.
Chair Mariani, members, Representative Lesch, I do understand your compassion for doing this thing. I know the law enforcement officers and the people in the public safety field that I talk to, they have a different than what you're hearing. One thing we have to remember, that driving is a privilege. It's not a right. You have to follow the rules. And the rules is not speeding, not running stop signs. If you cannot follow the rules, you get a fine. If you don't pay that fine, there has to be penalties and consequences. And one of those is, if you're not going to follow the rules, why should you be driving? And if you can continue driving after suspension, I have to agree with Representative Novotny. We need to start stiffening those penalties. So I do oppose this amendment, so I'll be voting no.
Very well. Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Lesch, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to move to a vote on adoption of the A3 amendment. And I'll ask the clerk to take the roll.
Mariani,
Yes.
Edelson,
Yes.
Johnson,
No.
Christensen,
Yes.
Considine,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Howard,
Yes.
Lesch,
Aye.
Long,
Yes.
Lucero,
Yes.
Miller,
No.
Moeller,
Yes.
Nash,
No.
Novotny,
Emphatic no.
O'Neill,
Is that a thing?
Yes.
Pinto,
Aye.
Poston,
No.
Mr. Chair, Lucero changes from aye to no.
All right. The clerk will note that then. And I'm sorry, are you done with the roll?
yeah, I'm adding Representative Lucero's now, so I'm trying to make sure I got the numbers
Okay,
right.
all right.
Eleven ayes, 6 nays, noes.
Very well. At a vote of 11-6, the A3 amendment to DE1 is adopted. Members, the next one on the list, just numerically anyway, is the A6 amendment. And I'll make sure I have the right amendment up. Oh, I don't. Hold on a second. Okay, I think, boy, I thought I had printed this out here in my house and I didn't print out the A6. I think this is the amendment that, and I'll have staff correct me or not. This is an amendment that I had drafted. And I had drafted because at the A6, April 6th rather, meeting, we had this language originally from Representative O'Neill. But I'm not sure that she wants to offer it or not. Nevertheless, I thought it was worthy to have it available for us to talk about. It's a alternative to the early release framework that's found in the DE1 amendment. And so at this point, I'm going to see if anyone wants to offer this.
Mr. Chair.
Hold on.
Mr. Chair.
I heard a couple.
Mr. Chair, is this the one that has the nonviolent offenders?
I believe it is, and I'm embarrassed because I don't have it in front of me.
Then I would like to offer the amendment.
Okay, very well. Representative, and I'm sorry, before you, I think I heard Representative O'Neill's voice, but I wanted to make sure.
Yes, Mr.
I'm sorry if I interrupted her.
It's quite all right.
My button.
Representative O'Neill, this was originally your language, and so I don't want to steal somebody else's language. But I do think it's worthy of us to talk about this amendment. So, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, certainly, Representative Constant, I can certainly offer it.
Okay.
That's absolutely fine. I just wasn't hearing anybody saying anything, and so I was going to say something, but let's go ahead and have the conversation. I would note that the ombudsman's language that is in the original DE is not acceptable to myself, or I think any of my colleagues on my side of the aisle. It grants way too much power. It's much too broad and sweeping in its language. And my amendment wasn't an attempt to narrow it. Not that I'm completely in love with the language that we drafted, but it's much better than the Haas language that was presented. And so I appreciate the fact that you're offering an alternative. I don't know that it's needed. I believe that the commissioner has all the power and authority that he needs to do what he needs to do to keep the prisons safe. So, we can offer it, but I just don't feel like he needs any additional power. But initially we drafted that because we were concerned that the governor would just do another executive order and that the legislature would have no opportunity to weigh in. And so that was our opportunity to let the legislature have a voice in that decision. So many executive orders have been done without much input from the minority in the House or even the majority in the Senate party. So that was our attempt to try to at least put some of our voice into the conversation. I know the governor is very busy, but it sure would be nice to be included in some conversations. So even today, for example, he let the media know advance of the legislature what he intends to do at 2:00 today. So there's yet another example of the governor not including the legislative leaders or members for that matter in his decisions and moving forward. So that's why we drafted that to begin with, really as a conversation to the governor, but we can certainly have that conversation again here if you like.
Yeah, and Representative O'Neill, I think that tension spot between a legislative body and executive body is an appropriate tension spot. It's always going to be there. I don't think anyone needs to enter into partisan space, and I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying I don't think it's necessary to have an appropriate conversation about what the right balance of power is, if you will. That's a principle that stands above partisan issues. And so I think it's absolutely appropriate for a legislative body to constantly assert its at least equal status in terms of shaping law in the land and having it implemented. And so, and that's partly why I wanted to make sure that we had this conversation in terms of finding what that right balance is. I would agree that that to the extent possible, the legislative branch ought to be speaking on these issues, and that's why I'm insisting on us, if we can, move forward with this bill at this time. But I'm going to revert back to Chair Considine. Representative Considine, you're moving adoption of the A6 amendment. Representative Considine, Chair Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think all of us will be a little more comfortable if we do offer some guidelines that say that this is for non-violent offenders. So that's my motion. And again, I think that we'll all be a little more comfortable if that is in there. Thank you.
Very well. Any discussion? I will, Chair Considine, I'll support this motion. Partly because I think it's important for us to try to speak consistently, regardless of our political caucuses. I am comfortable with the V1 language. I think that the issue of releasing even violent offenders is something that actually happens on a regular basis. Sooner or later, most people in our facilities are going to be released back once they've done their time, have demonstrated all sorts of action and movement toward no longer being a threat to society. And we do depend on professionals like our corrections commissioner to be able to make those decisions in terms of an early release. Nevertheless, I think it's okay what we're doing here with this amendment, and I'm perfectly okay moving forward with it. I think Representative O'Neill, you have another question or a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking through my notes and I'm not seeing it. In your DE, did you also include the free telephone and video calls? Because I know that would put the Department of Corrections in a substantial hole. And so that would be another reason to move this amendment as opposed to the original DE language, because we certainly don't want them to be in $1 million every 6 month continual hole. It's interesting. I've heard several members now say that they think that when the forecast comes out next, it's going to be a $10 billion deficit out of a almost $50 billion future budget that we'll be looking at. So anytime we're adding to that deficit, it's probably not a good idea. So I just, if you could just let me know if that was in the DE, because that would be another reason to move the amendment.
So, O'Neill, to answer your question directly, yes, I do have the MA communications provision. This language would remove that language from the DE1 amendment. Obviously, the commissioner has some ability now to, and has exercised some ability, partly because, my understanding, partly because the provider is stepping up, at least over the short term, to make it possible for the commissioner to provide a limited, free access. I think the DE1 language was workable, even with your concerns, but I'm comfortable at this point that within the existing budgetary parameters that we're able to strike some kind of a balance between properly managing the prison population in a way that is conducive to public health. And so I would prefer the DE1 language on it, but I'm willing to concede that at this point. So yes, this amendment does remove that provision. Very well, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we begin to talk about what the projected budget is going to look like, as a reminder to members, the $1.8 billion I believe we've gotten to the federal government is to address added cost as a result of the COVID-19 crisis through the CARES Act. And I believe that this would be one of those areas that type of money could be used to fund, to make sure that our facilities that have people confined continue to be safer, and people are able to do the best lives they can while they're locked up. I mean, one of the key things is without visitation, and we all know how critical visitation is for a resident's personal well-being. Without that, this becomes very much critical to make sure that happens. So I'm a little bit concerned that the A6 amendment doesn't call that out directly, but I agree with you, Mr. Chair, and that I believe within the purview of the Commissioner of Corrections, that this is something that they can funnel some of that money into, to make sure that that the individuals that are currently incarcerated are able to have that contact with those people that they need to have contact with.
Very well. With that, and see no further questions, the clerk will take the roll on the A6 amendment.
Mariani,
Yes.
Edelson,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Considine,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Howard,
Yes.
Lesch,
Aye.
Long,
Yes.
Lucero,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Moeller,
Yes.
Nash, Novotny,
Yes.
O'Neill?
Yes.
Pinto.
Yes.
Wait a minute.
Wait,
That was another member.
That didn't sound like O'Neill.
Oh, I'm sorry if that was.
Yeah, we'll go. I'll go back up to you, Representative Nash, in a bit. But Representative O'Neill,
Thank you. Yes.
Pinto,
Yes.
Colson,
Yes.
Nash.
Yes. As previously stated.
17 ayes.
All right, very well. That threw me for a while, members. I thought that's interesting. Very well. So the A6 amendment is adopted. Then we have, members, the A9 amendment. And who's offering the A9 amendment?
Chair Mariani, this is Representative Poston, and I would like to offer the A9 amendment.
Very well. Representative Poston moves adoption of the A9 amendment. Representative Poston.
Chair Mariani, when the youth intervention programs came with a request to do away with their matching funds, I decided to get involved with this, and we did a little bit of research, and we got on the phone and we talked with the YIPA folks. There are programs that certainly need some help, those that have their doors closed or are struggling to raise funds to make that match, or making use of volunteers during the governor's emergency declaration to stay at home. But giving broad exemption for 2 years is really not the answer. So the A9 amendment would allow the suspension of the local match requirement in calendar year 2020 for programs that have been directly impacted by the governor's emergency declaration and stay-at-home order. The amendment also requires DPS to report to the legislature on the number of grantees that did not fulfill the match requirement. This has all been reviewed with YIPA and with DPS, and they are okay with this amendment. So I would ask for your support, please.
Very well. Discussion, members. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So with that, the clerk will then take the roll on the A9 amendment.
Mariani,
Yes.
Edelson,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Considine,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Howard,
Yes.
Lesch,
Aye.
Long,
Yes.
Lucero,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Moeller,
Yes.
Nash, Novotny,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
Pinto,
Aye.
Poston,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
17 ayes.
Very well. The A9 amendment is amended. I'm sorry, I'm losing my words here. Holy cow. The amendment is adopted. With that, we're down to the A10 amendment. I believe Representative Johnson, that might be yours.
Chair Mariani, yes, that is my amendment.
Representative Johnson moves adoption of the A10 amendment. Representative Johnson?
Members, the A10 amendment is the Representative Pinto's House File 3243, which we heard and was, I believe, everybody in this committee supported that. It is a Sheriff's Association initiative to extend background checks, inquiries for law enforcement agency beyond just the licensed officers themselves. So it's more staff in there that are going to have access to critical information, just to make sure they have a good background check when they hire these individuals.
Very well. Representative Pinto, this was your bill. Do you have any thoughts on the A10 amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I maybe have a couple questions for the author of the amendment, and I'm grateful for the support of this. I guess I'm a little bit confused. What is the connection with the underlying bill that Representative Johnson sees in terms of bringing us up at this point? And I should maybe just note that I checked with the Sheriff's Association. I don't know that they were consulted in terms of advancing this amendment, and I know that I, as the bill author, was not. And we were kind of moved the language in other ways. I'm just a little bit confused by this. If Representative Johnson can explain.
Chair Johnson.
Chair Mariani, Representative Pinto, I believe it was important to do our best to get this passed, because this is an important issue that needs to be handled I know back years ago, a lot of gangs would have individuals that are their girlfriends or whatever. They'd get them to work in the sheriff's office to obtain that information, or a full background check would have spotted that. I'm not sure how much that's happened here. I did hear that it did happen down in the Minneapolis Police Department for a while. So I think it's important that we have good people working in the law enforcement that are in the offices that are good quality candidates working there to make sure sensitive information is not passed on. Since this is the public safety omnibus bill on policy, I thought this is a good place for it.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Johnson, I guess I don't think that this actually is, I mean, there are other policy provisions moving other places. So I don't think that this is an omnibus policy bill. I think this is my understanding is anyway, maybe the chair can verify for us, but that this, so again, I appreciate the support, but I guess I don't necessarily see the connection with the underlying bill, and it may make more sense for us to work together to move this in another way. But again, maybe the chair can clarify whether this is in fact intended to be an omnibus of everything that's policy and public safety.
Yeah, Chair Pinto, I doubt that we'll be able to do an omnibus policy bill. I think we maybe have one more hearing available to us, maybe two, we'll see. We have a lot of actually work still to do relative to agency budgets, which are going to be difficult, given some of the economic realities, right, that we have right now. So I think moving forward, we're going to be focusing more on that. My intent here, had to do with having a COVID related bill. And there's a couple of provisions here that could very well have stood alone. The driver's license issue, for instance, did stand alone 3 years ago. However, there was a very strong, compelling, I think, COVID argument, for that. So I don't want to be, a strict, constructionist here on this, but to the extent that, as we move a bill forward, that we adhere to good COVID arguments, that certainly would help, I think, with the identity of this bill.
Given, so Mr. Chair, it seems like, with your permission, Mr. Chair, I guess my thinking is that given that that I, as the House, as the bill's author, and then the proponents who brought this forward, didn't have a conversation with Representative Johnson in advance, I guess maybe with respect, I might suggest perhaps we would leave this off of this at this point. Maybe Representative Johnson and I can talk, and certainly as this moves forward, maybe there'd be a way we could then add this on the House floor if that seems appropriate. But given that this wasn't something that we had, it just feels a little bit awkward to me that it is coming in this way. So I might, with respect, unless Representative Johnson has another thought.
Well, and Representative Johnson, if I may, I think you're right. I don't think there's any opposition here. It does feel more than a bit unorthodox that somebody else's bill is moved, by someone else as an amendment. It just feels a little different. But Representative Johnson.
Chair Mariani, Representative Pinto, members, we're down to a couple weeks left of session. And we're going to be doing session mostly by calling in, very few people on the floor. I don't know if we're going to have a lot of time to get anything, anything other than this. My understanding, this is good possibility is the last committee meeting that we have. We might have one more dealing with some budget issues, and we're on the budget issues. I'm not how sure we're going to have anything. I doubt there's the surplus. Our reserves are gone. The projected surplus is gone. We're probably looking at a $10 billion deficit, or if not more, next year. I don't see any type of budget issues moving forward at all. It's going to be very dismal I'm positive it's going to be very dismal when we get the report out next week on the updated forecast. So what I'm looking at is getting good policy issues into this bill. There's a lot of things that I'll admit I don't like in this bill, but I would like to get something in this bill that is a positive.
Representative Pinto.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I guess yeah, I appreciate that, Representative Johnson. I just as I say, it's feeling a little bit awkward that neither the proponents of the bill nor the author of the bill we hadn't had any kind of discussion about it. So I guess I appreciate what you're doing, and my thinking is that when it comes up on the floor, we can add the language at that time. Let's make sure to talk about it. So you know, I guess I'd be Mr. Chair. I think that would probably urge we keep it out for now, but let's definitely have a conversation about it, Representative Johnson. And again, I do appreciate the support.
And again, members, you know, this is actually Representative Pinto's bill. You know, I don't know if this would help Representative Johnson, but we could certainly move this provision the next time we convene. Either I don't know where your bill is at right now, Representative Pinto. I'm not sure if we're still in possession of it. If we are, that'd be easy enough for us to do. The other thing we could do then also is to move it in whatever bill that we move. You know, the next time we meet, which I do expect will be sometime next week. Couple of very quick questions while you think about that, Representative Pinto, Representative Dean, then Representative Lesch, and then we got to get moving because we still have two other bills.
So I'll be pretty brief, and maybe it's more of a comment. You know, yeah. Let's wait till next week when we see what numbers are. There's been a lot of conjecture that we're going to have a $10 billion deficit, and given the reserves and given the current situation, the surplus, I think that that's all just conjecture and, you know, trying to get out there to try to either prepare us or message around something. But I want to take a little issue with Chair Johnson and his opening comments regarding this and this notion of gang members having their girlfriends go to work in the sheriff's department to gather information. I don't believe he has any evidence of anything like that. And I really take issue of painting the city of Minneapolis or other cities in that light, because without any proof that this is actually happening, I think it really sort of sets up this bill to become a real divisive bill, which it shouldn't be divisive at all. So I just felt the need to make some comments.
Okay, very well. Members, I'm going to call Chair Lesch, and then we're going to move to a vote here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Chair Johnson, I heard your, I probably wouldn't have said anything either, but I heard your comments at the front end declaring that every member who was here then has voted for this and supported this in the past. Am I accurate in recalling your statements to that effect?
Representative Johnson.
I believe that it was supported by pretty much everybody, not 100%. I'm not sure where it is. This bill right now is currently sitting in your committee.
Okay. Very well. Chair Lesch?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to know that we're making those claims, and that may well be the case, Chair Johnson, but I just did a quick check, and I know that you voted for House File 1061 at least 3 times, especially when it was part of Omnibus Prime. And I just want us to make note of that, members. All of our votes are public record. And, you know, if it's good when it's authored by a member of your party, like Representative Zerwas, who was Representative Otney's predecessor, who championed that bill. But when it's offered by the other side, it's a bad idea. I don't know. I take issue with that. So it just relates back to the vote on the A3, and I just want to make a note of that eventually, folks, all our votes come around here and we all remember them. So it's not really a question. It's more kind of a rhetorical point, Mr. Chair. That's all.
And Chair Lesch, I did know this bill was sitting in your committee, and I certainly don't want the bill in front of us to get dragged into your committee as a result of that. So I'm actually going to encourage members to not put this provision on. And so we'll move to a vote. Members, the clerk will take the vote on the A10 amendment.
Mariani,
No.
Edelson,
No.
Johnson,
Yes.
Christensen,
No.
Considine,
No.
Dean,
No.
Howard,
No.
Lesch,
No.
Long,
No.
Lucero,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Moeller,
No.
Nash,
Yes.
Devani,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
Pinto,
No.
Poston,
Yes.
seven ayes, 10 noes. The motion does not prevail.
Very well. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Members, let's.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Who's
Mr. Chair, the Representative Miller.
Representative Miller? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be real brief with this, but I do want to comment. We're doing a great job here, and we're trying to have an actual committee hearing distant on the some on the phone, some on the computer. This is kind of a complex committee anyway, where there's some confusion. And I almost said this in the last committee hearing, especially when I was having difficulty voting because I was on mute, which is really, I don't think anyone's fault. It just was the fact.
Right.
But as we're moving forward with this, when people make statements or when they vote a certain way or another, I'm kind of hearing a little bit of, assumptions of intent, or, we've heard this before, or some of these different things. I think votes just have to be votes, and they don't mean any more or any less than that. And as we kind of struggle through this, I guess for the whole committee, I just ask we've been doing a good job with patience and with consideration of the other people, but we really need to keep a high level of that, because there's been times in this committee where things start bouncing around in the conversation and you've actually lost me. And so you just have to go with the best information you have possible and move forward. And we need to be accountable to our votes and accountable to our statements. But I do think a little bit of latitude is needed with this. When we get this on the House floor, it'll be in final print. We can put amendments there. And I just think right now in the committee, you're doing a great job. Everyone's really trying hard, but I think we just need to be real patient with each other on some of this. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think it's very good advice. Thank you, Representative Miller. Members, the next item on the agenda, if we don't get done, we did post that we would reconvene later this afternoon, so let's see how we do. But the next item on the agenda is House File 1236, which is going to serve
Mr.
as
Chair, Mr. Chair, we have not voted on the DE yet.
Oh my gosh. Man, I am way off today. Thank you for bailing me out. Holy God. I was so moved by Representative Miller's comments, I just assumed we were done. All right, very well. Discussion on the DE1 amendment.
And may I have a question since
Yes, Representative O'Neill.
It's actually just a really brief comment. I'll be voting no on the DE, and mostly because the vast majority of this bill I don't think is actually needed. It's things that are already happening or the commission already has power to do. But I would point out one thing that I do oppose, because I think it constricts the commissioner's authority too much, which would be the forced single bunking and basically eliminating the double bunking possibility. I think that too much restricts his ability to do what he needs to do. And so mostly because of that provision in Section 2, I'll be voting no.
Noted. Other members? All right, now that I got my groove back,
Mr. Chair, Representative Johnson has his hand up.
Representative Johnson.
Chair Mariani, members, I agree with Representative O'Neill. There's some issues, quite a few issues with this bill that I can't vote for. One of them is what you mentioned about the double bunking. We have removing that. We have I recall when Rush City was built, it was quite a few cells were designed for double bunking. And unfortunately, the commissioner is not here because I had a lot of questions for him dealing with this issue today. Information I found out since our last meeting. One with the ending of the double bunking, I'd like to know how many beds are we going to lose? But the other issues that I found out talking to different individuals that work in the system. While we were on shelter in our homes under the governor's first orders, not just social distancing, but when we had orders to stay home and shelter, it turns out that the commissioner in the department were transporting prisoners to different facilities. They were letting non-essential contractors into the facilities. Inmates were not, they're not doing social distancing in the yards. The barber shops were still open, so while we couldn't get our haircuts, they were still getting their haircuts. They dropped the copay for medical treatments, and the medical treatment areas were getting overwhelmed with people coming in for anything that they could think of. While the outside population is doing what they need to do, inside our prisons, they were not. Again, moving them around, everybody going to the dining area all at one time, sitting shoulder to shoulder, while they're moving different inmates from prison to prison, letting people that non-essential employees into the system, and we wonder how we got COVID into our facilities. Those are some questions I would love to ask the commissioner, but he didn't have time to come here today. Other issues that we have is another issue that I just found out the other day is going back to, I think it's great that we want to get the information to our law enforcement and first responders if they have been have on their testing. But in my area, we can't get testing. I don't know if you've looked at the Department of Health's website for their testing. Their sites that they're setting up in the state, an area the size of bigger than the size of the state of Vermont is left without a test site. Up until today, they finally put one in by Mille Lacs Lake, by Onamia, that's open for 1 hour, Monday through Friday, by appointment only. Otherwise, if you live in East Central Minnesota, you have to go to Stillwater, Blaine, Monticello, St. Cloud, Brainerd, Little Falls, Cloquet, Duluth. Anywhere north of Blaine, south of Cloquet, and east of St. Cloud, as of yesterday, there was not one single testing site by the state of Minnesota. Where are my first responders supposed to go? If they live up by Pine City, driving 50, 60 miles to Duluth, they live at Rush City, driving 70 miles to St. Cloud. It's great they want to do testing, but they need to get the testing sites across this state. There's 163 sites and we have 10,000 square miles without any. That's part of the frustration I have today. But with this bill, A lot of this stuff is unneeded. Just yesterday alone, I read an article about release of prisoners in California. They released 7 individuals that were known sex offenders, and some of the worst sex offenders that they have in that state. Within a few days, they reoffended. They were brought back into the county jail, immediately put on a locating device on their ankles and released. They cut those off and they're on the run again. I'm glad we have some parameters that were put into this bill, but I'm concerned about releasing them. So I cannot vote for this bill.
All right. Thank you, Representative Johnson. Members, the chair renews his motion to adopt the DE1 amendment. The clerk will take the roll.
Mariani,
Yes.
Edelson,
Yes.
Johnson,
No.
Christensen,
Yes.
Considine,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Howard,
Yes.
Lesch,
Aye.
Long,
Yes.
Lucero,
No.
Miller,
No.
Moeller,
Yes.
Nash,
Nope.
Novotny,
No.
O'Neill,
No.
Pinto,
Yes.
Poston.
No.
Ten ayes and 7 noes.
Very well. The motion does prevail, and House File 3156 is amended. So members, the chair now moves that House File 3156 be recommended or be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Clerk will take the roll.
Mariani,
Chair, we still have public comment. We still have members of the public waiting to comment before we actually vote.
Well, Mr. Lundy, we have like 12 minutes left here. But if we do have people in the waiting room to comment, then we'll take public comment. Who's in the room? Is there someone in the waiting room for public comment? Mr. Hasse, I think you're in the room, and I'm wondering if you're muted. Is there someone in the waiting room for public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's Mark Kazi, the Ombuds for Corrections.
Welcome, Mr. Hasse. Good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was just going to give.
Hasse, I think you're in the room, and I'm wondering if you're muted.
I don't think I am. Can't hear me?
You are actually, you cannot watch on the live feed and do the Zoom call at the same time. If you're on the Zoom call, you need to be on the Zoom call.
I've turned off the live feed. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I can hear you just fine.
Great. Mr. Chair, I was going to provide some updated data, basically.
Well, thank you.
I realize that you're trying to wrap up here. Do you want me to do that? I can do it in probably 3 minutes.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I do have about 5 PowerPoint slides that will actually just make that go faster. Are you seeing that now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the last time I was before you, I reported on local correctional populations. This is from a national organization. My point here is that local jail populations continue to be down in the 40% range. But I know we're talking about state populations here today. This is information on current facility cases and testing, and this is all available on the public Department of Corrections website. So as of yesterday, a total of 79 confirmed positive cases. The biggest that you've all probably heard about are at Moose Lake and Willow River. One thing about Willow River you should know is they only have 142 inmates there. So that's almost a third of the population that has been tested positive. And then 39 staff have tested positive as well. What has been done to reduce the population? One that was talked about last time is reducing release violation revocations. I don't have, it's hard to measure numbers exactly on there, so I don't have them, but you'll see that reflected in the overall population reduction. On the work release expansion that the commissioner has done, so far 25 people have been released. That was as of yesterday. And I believe 32 are eligible for release, and the remaining 7 are just getting the arrangements made to be released. And then this conditional medical release program is new as of since the last hearing that you had. It's in progress. It started about a week ago. I do not have any, to my knowledge, nobody's actually been released on it, but they are looking at people who have, and this is under current statutory authority, people who have medical conditions that would put them at grave risk of harm if they were to contract COVID-19, and they are going through a process.
Did we lose you, Mr. Hasse?
I can no longer hear him.
It looks like he's frozen on my screen. I see Representative Dean nodding affirmatively as well.
Mr. Chair, this is Paul Munier. I could speak quickly.
Very well. Good to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Paul Munier. I'm the Executive Director of YIPA. I just wanted to say thank you to the committee for allowing some of these youth intervention programs to adapt to these strange times. We're very grateful, and we work so hard on getting bipartisan support. So there's nothing we like to see better than a unanimous vote to help our members out. So thank you. And that's all I really had to say. I'll be very brief because I know you're behind schedule here.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Munier, and thank you again for the work that you do with YIPA.
Thank you.
All right. Very well. I don't know whether we're going to get Mr. Hasse back or not. I didn't think he was done, but.
Mr. Chair, could you reach out to him afterwards and just have him send that PowerPoint to all of us?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was going to recommend that, or ask him, so we can post it on our website for the public as well. Okay. I don't see any other testimony, and so I'd like us to vote on the bill. So the chair renews his motion, House File 3156 as amended, be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, and the clerk will take the roll.
Mariani?
Yes.
Edelson?
Yes.
Johnson?
No.
Johnson? No. Christensen?
Yes.
Considine?
Yes.
Dean?
Yes.
Howard?
Yes.
Lesch?
Aye.
Long?
Yes.
Lucero?
No.
Miller?
No.
Moeller?
Yes.
Nash?
No.
Novotny?
No.
O'Neill?
No.
Pinto?
Yes.
Poston?
No.
10 ayes, 7 noes. It passes.
All right, so the motion does prevail, and House File 3156 as amended is re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. We have 4 minutes left, members. It doesn't seem like enough time But let's see what we can get done. And at some point, I suspect the House is going to, or IT is going to kick us off here. Representative Lesch, you have House File 1236, which is going to serve as a vehicle bill for House File 4571. And so, Representative Lesch, your motion, I believe, is to refer House File 1236 to the Committee on Ways and Means.
It is, Mr. Chair, and considering the time, that will be the extent of my comments.
Yeah, you may well be correct. And then Representative Lesch moves adoption of the A1 amendment, which is House File 4571 language. Representative Lesch, what is the A1 amendment in one sentence?
Forfeiture bill, the great compromise, Mr. Chair.
We heard this bill in judiciary, strong bipartisan support. The reason we're hearing it here is because of the vagaries of our schedule and time during this unusual time. And we want to make sure that it formally went through this committee. Representative Johnson, you were highly supportive of the bill in judiciary, as I recall. I guess at this point I would turn to you, given our shortness of time, to see whether or not the minority caucus would be amenable to moving this bill forward, similar as it has been moved forward in judiciary. I'm not sure Representative Johnson's still with us.
Mr. Chair, I think his internet is down.
Oh, no. Oh, gosh.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Representative O'Neill. Representative O'Neill, I believe you were in judiciary.
Problems with doing that. It's,
that's Johnson.
I think
Johnson,
he said yes, we can move forward.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Ben Johnson with House Research. I just want to clarify the motion. You've been discussing the A1 amendment. You actually need to be moving the DE1 amendment.
You're correct. That's right. I jumped on my sheet ahead. That's right. So Representative Lesch withdraws his motion on the A1 amendment and moves adoption of the DE1 amendment.
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank God for staff.
Yes, indeed. And I believe that's what Representative Johnson was speaking to. So with that, there being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the DE1.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. This is Ben Johnson again. There is an amendment to that.
You're
amendment.
right.
That's the A1.
I am jumping all over the place. Mr. Johnson is correct. The A1 amendment, Representative Lesch, is that your amendment as well?
It is, Mr. Chair.
Very well. Representative Lesch moves adoption of the A1 amendment to the DE1. Representative Lesch, what is the A1?
I don't know. Can I have Mr. Johnson tell me what that is too?
Very well, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, members, this is a technical amendment. It was adopted yesterday in judiciary. The underlying bill gets rid of the filing fee to challenge a forfeiture in court. This clarifies the notice given to someone whose property is subject to forfeiture. So it's clear to those individuals that there is no filing fee.
Very well. This will align the language with the language in judiciary then. Discussion?
Mr. Chair, can we just go to a voice vote so we can get it done quickly?
You know what? I think it's a really good idea. All in favor of the A1 amendment, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion prevails. We are now on the DE1 amendment as amended. Discussion?
I would say we do have a number of testifiers, most of which are testifying in favor of the bill. There is one individual who would like to testify against opposing the bill, and just wanted to note that to see how you would like to proceed.
Very,
in the waiting room, I can let them in.
very well. I see Mr. Ward, Mr. Small. They were supportive in judiciary. Chief Potts did express some concerns in judiciary. Members, we're 1 minute over our time here.
Mr. Chair, we have a written testimony from the opposition. I think we're all aware of what that was, and there was a pretty deep conversation yesterday And I believe even Representative Mueller helped to move that conversation along. And I think most of our concerns have been alleviated, but I think since Representative Johnson doesn't have internet right now, I think.
Yeah, let me ask this of Mr. Ward, Mr. Small, and Chief Potts, if you can submit your comments in written form. I will make sure that they are posted publicly on the committee website for this hearing. With that, then we're on the D1 amendment as amended. All in favor of adoption of the D1 amendment, please say aye.
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 All the same sign. Motion prevails. Representative Lesch moves that the House File 1236 as amended be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. We're going to have to roll call this.
Mr. Chair, Lucero has a question.
Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with the how fast we're moving, I just want to make sure my understanding is correct. We took a fantabulous drone bill and we amended into it a radically awesome forfeiture reform bill. Is that correct?
I believe we took out the drone language, though, just to be real clear. But those are pretty good descriptions. Very well. The clerk will take the roll.
Mariani. Mariani.
Yes.
Edelson.
Oh, sorry.
Edelson.
Yes.
Johnson.
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Considine.
Yes.
Dean.
Yes.
Howard.
Yes.
Lesch.
Aye.
Long.
Yes.
Lucero.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Mueller.
Yes.
Nash. Nash.
No, because we did not debate the bill and have testimony.
Novotny.
No. Same reason.
O'Neill.
Yes, because I heard it yesterday.
Pinto.
Yes.
Poston.
Yes.
15 ayes, 2 noes.
Very well. The motion.
So close to kumbaya.
The motion prevails, and House File 1236 as amended is referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Thank you, Representative Lesch. Members, we have Representative Tabke's bill. I don't know how we're doing. Are they still streaming us? Can anyone verify that for me?
I'm here.
The symbol's still up.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're publicly available, because the minute we're not, then we absolutely do need to stop. Representative Tabke, you have House File 3085. The chair moves. Actually, we heard this bill and we laid it on the table. So the chair is going to take House File 3085 off the table. And the motion is to refer this to the Committee on Ways and Means. Representative Tabke, super quick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Since we last met and had considerable discussion about this bill for transit safety, I've been working a lot with both counterparts in the Senate and Representative Kosnick, and have come upon a bill. So we have a DE2 amendment, which is here today, that will need to pass. And we have come to agreement on this bill as to how we can make it move forward and be better for everyone. So we are hoping to get your support here today.
Good bipartisan work, Representative Tabke. The chair moves adoption of the DE2 amendment, and I think you just described the spirit of it, but is there anything in particular you want to add in the DE2?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This the DE2 amendment works really hard to put a lot of counter structures on the bill. So it's creating a transit safety program where we'll have folks who will be additional folks that are non-sworn officers who will be working on the transit system. They will be able to carry Narcan. They will also be able to administer administrative citations, to write administrative citations as well. So this creates an administrative citation program for fare enforcement and code of conduct enforcement, and making sure that everyone is traveling on a safe transit system. And so with this as well, we think this is the perfect time to implement a system such as this, because with COVID crisis that we're working through right now, transit ridership is significantly down. And as we roll back into people starting to use transit again in much heavier numbers, we want to have this program in place to instill a culture of safety and positivity on the transit system.
Okay, very well. Discussion. I see Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Tabke, can you speak to the fiscal note, the cost to the?
Yeah.
Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative O'Neill. So this bill right now, the governor has appropriated I forget what the exact appropriation is, but in his original appropriation, the governor had over $3 million going to this bill and going to this program. So it's a priority of the governor's office as well. And so with this, in the bill that we have today, we don't have any appropriation in this bill. So we still do have to work that piece out. We're waiting until next week when we get the update on where we're at financially in the state and figuring that piece out from there. And then secondly, as well, this will, once we pass through here, hopefully today, what we will have happen is that this will get inserted into we're doing a second transportation finance bill, which a second transportation bill, which will carry financial pieces in it. And that's going to get done next week. And so we'll be putting this language into that bill. And it will go to Ways and Means from there as well.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in my notes, it says it's a general fund appropriation as opposed to coming out of the highway user trust fund or the sales tax from gas. And either one are not going to have a whole lot of money left in it, if any. I had mentioned before what other members had talked about the deficit moving forward. So for that reason, unfortunately, I cannot support this bill just because it does have a cost and we do have to pay for things.
And Representative Tabke, that'll be a hard conversation in Ways and Means, but it will be discussed there. Representative Tabke.
Yes, and Mr. Chair and Representative O'Neill, with that, we do have some what I think are very good ways of handling this. There's a lot of participation with the counties, and this is something that will be a positive thing moving forward. And with that as well, we have right now there are many bus drivers and many folks who aren't currently driving buses, and they're delivering groceries and they're doing a lot of other things. We think that there are a lot of really good ways, as well as federal money coming into the state for Metro Transit and Metropolitan Council, in order to make this work better. And so there are a lot of good ways to move this forward. So I appreciate your financial concern on this, and we will absolutely be handling that and won't move forward if there's obviously no way to pay for it.
Very well. Members, House IT tells us we have until 2:30, which is 5 minutes. I do have a question from Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be brief because I'm having connectivity issues out here. But I was speaking with Representative Koznick, who I believe this was his bill, to the comment from earlier that we don't take each other's bills, but I believe there is bipartisan support. But Representative Tabke, if I remember correctly, there is a fairly substantial surplus within the Met Council for something just like this that can pay for this. Can you please address that issue?
Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Chair Mariani and Representative Nash, that yes, there are funds we hope that are available within Met Council. I don't have any numbers today as to exactly what they have for reserves and different things like that to be able to go, but that possibly could be part of our solution and discussion as we move forward. But we're waiting to figure out exactly what the governor's office puts forward in for appropriation for this as it goes, so that we can make good decisions from a fiscal perspective.
Very well. Representative Dash?
And Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, just super fast. Perhaps House fiscal staff might have that balance, because I do believe that it's sufficient to cover the payment for this program. I think that's a germane question to the effort that we're going to put out here today. And I think that folks who are a part of this debate are how much.
Representative Dash, you're going in and out, unfortunately. I could turn very quickly to Mr. Walsh, but I suspect we'll be having this conversation in Ways and Means. I'm not sure Mr. Walsh has the Met Council accounts before us, but Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Chair, John Walls, House Fiscal Staff, that is correct. I'm not familiar with Met Council finances.
Okay, but duly noted, good question. Representative Tabke, I think everything's going to have to be on the table in Ways and Means, assuming this gets there.
And
very well.
Mr. Chair, if I believe the number is north of 110 million.
Okay. Very well.
Which certainly seems more than sufficient to pay for this. But yeah, I'm having massive internet problems out here in the hinterlands.
Well, thanks for hanging in there.
Mr. Chair, we're down to 2 minutes.
Representative Dean?
We're down to 2 minutes.
We're down to 2 minutes. Anything further? Very well. So let me make sure I got this right. That we did amend this, because I've been off my groove today. We did amend this, is that correct? Very well. So then the chair renews his motion that House File 3085 as amended be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. The clerk will take the roll.
Mariani?
Yes.
Edelson?
Yes.
Johnson? Johnson? Christensen?
Yes.
Considine?
Yes.
Dean?
Yes.
Howard?
Yes.
Lesch?
Aye.
Long?
Yes.
Lucero?
Sarah had to leave for another meeting.
Miller?
Yes.
Moeller?
Yes.
Nash?
Yes.
Novotny?
No.
O'Neill?
No.
Pinto?
Aye.
Poston?
Yes.
Johnson?
No. Did you hear me say no?
Yeah. $13 yes, 3 no's, 1 excused.
Very well. The motion does prevail, and House File 3085 as amended is re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Thank you, Representative Tabke. Members, that concludes our business for today. Please stay tuned. I do hope that we'll get at least one more, frankly, at least committee hearing, and looking to have that sometime next week. Thank you all for your patience and for your good debating engagement here today. Please, everyone have a good weekend. With that, this committee stands adjourned.